He changed the sound of rock forever, inspired millions, and reimagined what a guitar could do. But behind Eddie Van Halen's brilliant smile and lightning-fast solos were rivalries the public never saw. There were 6 guitarists he deeply admired, competed with, and at times could barely tolerate. What caused these quiet tensions between icons, and why did some of rock's greatest players end up on Eddie's private list of grudges? Let's uncover the 6 guitarists Eddie Van Halen reportedly hated the most.
Number 6. Eric Clapton. Before Eruption, before sold-out arenas, there was a young Eddie Van Halen sitting in his Pasadena bedroom, a cheap guitar in hand and a pile of worn-out Cream records spinning on his turntable. Night after night, he dropped the needle on Crossroads, trying to copy every fiery bend and soulful lick from Eric Clapton's legendary Les Paul. To Eddie, Clapton wasn't just an influence. He was the reason he started playing guitar. He once told Guitar World, "Clapton was my main influence. I'd spend hours figuring out what he was doing. I learned that solo on Crossroads, note for note. He was God to me." In those early years, fame, tone, and songwriting didn't matter. Eddie just wanted to understand why Clapton's playing felt alive, the phrasing, the sustain, the pauses. They became part of his musical DNA. But time changes everything. By the late 1970s, Eddie Van Halen had achieved something even Clapton never did. He reinvented the guitar itself. When Eruption dropped, it sounded like it came from another planet. His two-handed tapping, harmonics, and dive bombs redefined guitar playing. This quiet kid from Pasadena suddenly became the future of rock. Fans were in awe, but not everyone was impressed. When Clapton was asked in 1980 about Van Halen, his response shocked Eddie. "He's very good technically, but I don't hear much soul," Clapton said. The comment was casual, but it cut deep. The man Eddie had idolized dismissed his music as cold and mechanical. Years later, Eddie admitted, "It broke my heart. I learned everything from him. I wasn't trying to outplay him. I was inspired by him. Hearing that he didn't like what I was doing really got to me." Eddie never spoke badly about Clapton in return, but friends said he struggled quietly with the disappointment. Part of their divide came from philosophy. Clapton's playing was rooted in restraint and blues emotion. Each note told a story. Eddie's style was about freedom, energy, and fearless experimentation. They embodied 2 eras. Clapton, the voice of the 1960s, Eddie, the sound of the future. Yet the admiration never disappeared. In 1995, Eddie said, "Clapton's tone on Crossroads, that's still untouchable. That's pure feeling." When the 2 finally met in Los Angeles in the mid-1980s, Eddie was excited but nervous. Clapton was polite but distant. They talked gear and amps, but not emotion. Afterward, Eddie told a friend, "He's just a man. I think I love the myth more than the person." That moment changed him. He stopped worshiping legends and started seeing them as people, brilliant but human. When asked years later if Clapton's comments still hurt, Eddie laughed. "Maybe he didn't get it, maybe I didn't get him either. We're from different planets, man." Different worlds indeed. Clapton painted with blues and shadows. Eddie splashed neon across the sky. After Eddie's death in 2020, Clapton reportedly spoke fondly of him in private, calling him a true innovator. By then, Eddie had already made peace. He once said, "If Clapton hadn't existed, neither would I. Whatever he thinks of me doesn't change that." Even near the end, his admiration remained. "I'll always be chasing what I heard on those old Cream records." That's where the fire started. Eddie's heartbreak over Clapton ran deep, but his next clash burned hotter. This one wasn't about disappointment. It was about pure rivalry.
Number 5. Richie Blackmore. Meeting your hero can be intimidating, especially when that hero is Richie Blackmore, the moody genius behind Deep Purple and Rainbow. For a young Eddie Van Halen, Blackmore wasn't just another rock star. He was a master of tone and drama. Eddie would play along to Burn and Highway Star until his fingers bled, captivated by Richie's precision and intensity. When Van Halen debuted in 1978, Eddie suddenly found himself appear among the legends he'd once idolized. But when he finally met Richie, reality hit hard.
In a 1982 interview, Eddie recalled, "He just stared at me, wouldn't say hi, nothing. I was crushed. I looked up to this guy my whole life, and he just blew me off." That cold silence hurt more than any insult. Eddie was an open, friendly guy who loved to talk about guitars for hours, so Richie's distant behavior felt like rejection. He later said, "Guys like Joe Perry and Richie Blackmore just gave me the shaft with their eyes. Wouldn't say hello, wouldn't be nice, nothing." It stung because Eruption had made Eddie a global sensation, but his heroes seemed to look at him not with respect, but suspicion. Blackmore's personality didn't help. He was known to be difficult, even with his own bandmates, and his mysterious image often came off as arrogance. When asked about Van Halen years later, Richie said, "He's a fine player, but he plays too many notes." Was it jealousy? Maybe. Or just an old-school musician struggling with a new generation sound. Blackmore's playing was classical and controlled. Eddie's was explosive and free. They weren't enemies, they were symbols of two eras clashing. In 1995, Eddie looked back with understanding. "I was probably too sensitive back then. Maybe he was shy. But man, I worshipped that guy growing up. Still do." Even Richie later acknowledged Eddie's genius. In 2008, he told Classic Rock magazine, "Eddie Van Halen brought something new. What he did with the whammy bar and tapping, it was clever. He found his own voice." By then, the rivalry had melted into mutual respect.
Number 4. Joe Perry. In 1978, Van Halen was the storm shaking rock's foundations. Their debut album roared across the airwaves, and 23-year-old Eddie Van Halen was the new guitar messiah. But not everyone welcomed him. On tour, he often sensed coldness from older rock stars, especially Joe Perry of Aerosmith. Eddie recalled, "Guys like Joe Perry would just give me the shaft with their eyes. Wouldn't say hello, wouldn't be nice. I'm not that way." Imagine that, pouring your heart into every show, only to have your idols ignore you completely. Eddie felt that Perry and others viewed him as a threat. He wouldn't help anyone because they felt threatened, he said honestly. And maybe they were. Eddie's style, fast, fearless, and experimental, was revolutionizing guitar playing, while Perry's bluesy swagger belonged to an older generation. Years later, though, Joe Perry completely changed his tune. In a 2013 interview, he admitted, "Eddie's playing was phenomenal. He reinvented guitar playing. I was blown away by that first Van Halen album." It was belated, but it was respect. And by then, Eddie had already stopped chasing anyone's approval. He said, "I just love to play. Doesn't matter where or when, I play for the joy of it." Number 3. Tom Scholz. It was a sunny, late 70s afternoon show, Van Halen and Boston sharing the stage. Eddie finished a blistering solo. Moments later, Tom Scholz from Boston played the same solo. Eddie was stunned. He later said, "I was drunk and pissed. Everyone looked at me like, what's going on?" To him, it felt like someone had stolen his identity right on stage. And it didn't help that Scholz was distant and reserved backstage. Scholz was the opposite of Eddie, an MIT-trained engineer who built Boston's sound through science and precision. Eddie was instinct and chaos, pure musical feel. "There's a difference between inspiration and duplication," Eddie said. "You can be inspired, but if you don't evolve, you're just tracing someone else's shadow." Though they never feuded publicly, their philosophies couldn't have been more different. For Eddie, emotion was everything. If you think too much, he said, you lose it. Music isn't about formulas, it's about feel. Still, both eventually acknowledged each other's genius. Scholz called Eddie imaginative. You can't teach that. And Eddie said, "Anyone who builds their own gear, I respect that." Number 2. Rick Derringer. In 1978, Van Halen's fame was exploding. Then one night, Rick Derringer, an older rock veteran, opened for them. After the show, Eddie confronted him. "Rick, I grew up on your stuff, but don't play my melody. Use the technique if you want, but not my solo." Derringer had copied Eddie's solo note for note, twice. Eddie finally told him, "If you keep doing that, you're off the tour." And Derringer was gone. Eddie wasn't being egotistical, he was protecting his identity. He'd worked tirelessly to create his sound.
Seeing it mimicked felt like theft. It's messed up, he later said, because I copied some of his chops when I was young. The problem wasn't imitation. It was copying without heart. As Eddie's father once taught him, if you play someone else's song, make it your own. By the 1990s, Eddie could laugh about it. He said, I was hot back then, but you learn, being great means being copied. Even Derringer later admitted, he's a monster player. Nobody can touch him.
Number 1. Randy Rhoads. In the early 1980s, two young guitar prodigies dominated rock, Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads. They were constantly compared, and it drove both of them crazy. Eddie once said, Randy was honest. He said he learned from me. He was good, but I don't think he did anything I hadn't done. There's nothing wrong with that. I copied others too. It was half praise, half challenge. He respected Randy, but also wanted to remind the world who started it. Randy, classically trained and disciplined, was Eddie's opposite. Order versus chaos, control versus instinct. Fans fueled their rivalry, and the media amplified it. Ozzy Osbourne later said, Randy didn't have a nice thing to say about Eddie. Maybe they were rivals. Some even joked that Rhoads' guitar tech taped Eddie's photo to Randy's wah pedal, so every time he stepped on it, he was literally stomping on Eddie. Still, beneath the tension was something human. Eddie wasn't angry so much as protective. He'd changed the language of guitar, and now he was hearing that same language echoed back at him. When Rhoads died tragically in 1982, the rivalry ended instantly, frozen in time. Eddie rarely spoke about him afterward, and when he did, it was with quiet respect. Maybe he never truly hated Randy Rhoads. Maybe he saw too much of himself in him, and that reflection brought equal parts admiration and unease.
Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon.